Hello, and welcome to our Peter Martin House here at Doon Heritage Village. Tonight, we're talking about Christmas. And one of the things we love to talk about is all the different traditions that you see at Christmas time. So in this home, we're talking a little bit about an Old Order Mennonite Christmas. Now, traditions vary slightly from family to family, but for an Old Order Mennonite family in 1914, the first gift that children got on Christmas morning was that they got to sleep in. Now, for a lot of kids, that might not sound like a gift because a lot of children who celebrate Christmas love to jump up, run downstairs, and open all of their presents first thing in the morning. It might also not sound like a great present for the parents because of what they were doing that allowed the kids to sleep in. However, for Old Order Mennonite children, in 1914, you were typically living on a farm. That meant every single morning, every single day, you're getting up extra early to do all of your chores. Feeding your animals, watering your animals, cleaning up after your animals, also chopping wood, carrying water. There was always lots to do on a farm. Every single day, even weekends, even your birthday. Except on Christmas morning. Because on Christmas morning, your parents got up extra early and did all the work for you. Now, parents, that might not seem like a great gift for you, but it meant a nice, quiet morning while all the kids were sleeping, while you would be able to do the work together. So it was a great time to get some parent time and a great time for those kids to get to sleep in. However, they would have been pretty excited when they woke up as well, because you did get your first gift first thing in the morning. So the children, when they woke, would be extra excited for Christmas morning breakfast. Running down the stairs, they'd see the table spread out similar to what we have here, and their very first present would be sitting on the plate. What looks like nothing more than a white square of fabric, often mistaken for a napkin, is actually a brand new handkerchief. Now, a handkerchief in 1914 was what you would use to blow your nose. So basically, it's like getting a Kleenex for Christmas. Merry Christmas, kids. But a handkerchief is like a Kleenex that you don't throw away. So you'd actually keep it in your pocket, take it out, blow your nose, and put it back into your pocket, which meant you'd be using it over and over again. But even in 1914, the kids were probably more excited about what was underneath the handkerchief than the handkerchief itself, because underneath it were all of your Christmas treats. Now, front and center, easy to see, is our Christmas orange. Now, oranges are something that are still a tradition in many families who celebrate Christmas today. You might find an orange at the bottom of your stocking. Maybe nowadays you actually find like a chocolate orange. But this tradition goes back to 1914 and even further back because oranges were a little bit harder to get, growing in places like Florida and California that were pretty far away. And since they came from farther away, they were often more expensive. Now, by 1914, they were becoming more popular and easier to get, but it was still that sort of sweet treat that you didn't get very often. Old Order Mennonites in particular, being farming families, often wouldn't be buying much of their food. They'd be growing and raising all of their food. So getting a store-bought treat like an orange was extra special. There's lots of stories about how kids actually wouldn't eat their orange right away. They would take it and tuck it away and eat it piece by piece, or maybe even save the peel so that they could make things smell like oranges for days after Christmas. Other than that, you also get a bunch of mixed nuts. Things like hazelnuts or walnuts or almonds, Brazil nuts, chestnuts, all sorts of delicious things. Again, these come from far away, and they're a little bit more expensive, so not the kind of treat that you would get any time of year other than Christmas. Then mixed in with our nuts, we also have a little bit of candy. These ones here are actually Scotch mints, store-bought, not as expensive, but usually not something we get for breakfast. The last little treat is something called peppernuts. Now, peppernuts is a special type of cookie, very common in Old Order Mennonite Christmases. It loosely translates to peppernut, so it's actually a really spicy cookie and pretty hard. Typically, you'd make them a little bit before Christmas, and you would actually store them in a crock like this so that they could age. And as they got older, they would get spicier and tastier. Then on Christmas morning, you could eat them either by sucking on them until they were soft enough to chew, or you could dunk them in your coffee or your tea or your hot chocolate, whatever you happen to have to drink. Then, after a full breakfast, including your nuts and an orange, cookies and candy, the whole family would head off to church. Christmas is a deeply religious celebration for the Mennonite families, so they would have spent a few hours in church talking about the reasons behind Christmas, why it was celebrated. So it would have been a long listen in church, followed by a great big meal. Everybody would come back from church, and usually it wasn't just the parents and kids. Often it would be the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, and all of their kids, so it would be a huge family gathering with a great big feast. After this delicious meal, the dads would head out to the barn and have to catch up with chores, but it was also a great time to just catch up with each other. The ladies of the house would have to do the cleaning inside, but afterwards they would go for a long Christmas Day walk. And this is a tradition you still see today. Often on Christmas Day, the ladies will be out walking together, catching up on what's been going on with their families. And the kids, well, the kids didn't have to do any work the whole day, so they got to play.
Hello, welcome. Today I'm making peppernuts, also known as peppernuts. They're cookies that are popular at Christmas time, and the recipe comes from the 1906 Berlin cookbook. Mrs. Graber contributed it. We just need a few ingredients. We need flour and sugar, milk, an egg, some baking soda, and spices. There's cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and ginger in this recipe. Let's begin. The first thing is our egg. Need to beat that up a little bit. And now for a cup of sugar. The measuring equipment I'm using is what women in 1914 would use. Household things like cups and teaspoons that you find in the kitchen. And I need to beat this until it's nice and smooth. Okay. Now I'm going to add the spices. It's a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of cloves, and a teaspoon of allspice, and just half a teaspoon of ginger. I've already measured them out. Mix that in. Worst would be to get a chunk of one of the spices, so I'm going to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. Okay. Now the next thing is a teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in a little bit of milk is what it says. So I've got a teaspoon of baking soda. I'm going to put it in this cup and then just add a little bit of the milk. It's usually around a teaspoon as well, but I'll just do it by eye. And a little bit more. and stir that together until it's dissolved. Okay, now I'll add it to the bowl. Okay, and now I mix that in. Oh, it smells so good. I wish you could smell it. All those spices. This is kind of a grown-up cookie. And now it says, flour enough to roll between your hands into small balls like marbles. So I find that's approximately a cup of flour. So we'll add that in and mix it up. I usually get a child to help with this part. There we go. And now I'm going to roll them the size of a marble. So, like that. And you need to space them fairly far apart on the cookie sheet, because they do spread a bit. What do you think? Is that about a marble size? I think so. So my oven's preheating. You'll need to preheat your oven for about 400 degrees and bake the cookies for 7 minutes approximately. Your house will smell wonderful. Take the cookies out, let them cool, and they'll keep for a good long time. Enjoy.
So after the chores were done and the dads came back into the home and the ladies were back from their Christmas Day walk, the children would finish their games and be waiting for that last visitor. Grandma would actually be the one to come into the room, and she would usually start by again reading the Christmas story. So after spending quite a bit of time in church, you would get to hear the story again, this time from Grandma. Afterwards, she would close the Bible and set it aside, and after a whole day of waiting, it was finally time for presents. Now in this family, you may have noticed there's not a lot of decorations. That's because decorating is not part of their tradition, so there's no Christmas tree. However, all the children would know that the presents were hidden way up high in the Christmas cupboard. So Grandma would carefully reach up into the cupboard and pull out a toy for each child in the family. They would get one gift, maybe a nice warm pair of socks, or often it would be a toy, something like a Jacob's ladder, like this one. Whatever the toy was, it would be something that was homemade by someone in your family just for you. So it would probably be exactly what you wanted. So for Christmas Day in our Old Order Mennonite family, they got to spend the day together, have lots of good food, enjoy time at church, play games, and then get to play with a brand new present.
Hello, Welcome. I'm so pleased you were able to come into the store tonight. We have everything that you need. And you know, the electric lights mean that we can stay open later for your shopping pleasure. My husband was called away. The station agent telephoned to say that one of our orders was in at the train station. He didn't want it to freeze. I'm hoping that we have walnuts in that order because everyone is asking for them, and with the war on, they're in short supply. We do have everything else you need though. The store is decorated. We have paper garlands, and we sell those, as well as these lovely honeycomb bells that are all the rage right now. We've brought out our old friend, the Vinoxman. He was made by Morantz Lindner years ago, made out of paper mache, and he always lets customers know that it's Christmas time. We have a display case full of glass ornaments for you to select from. There's St. Nicholas in there, and swans, glass balls, everything you could need, candles as well. And don't forget to pick up gifts here. We have gifts for children, like the toy cannons for boys that shoot out little peas. We've got dolls for girls and tea sets. We have gifts for women like hat pins and handkerchiefs and tea sets, and practical things like brooms. For gentlemen, we have the cigars and cigar cases, practical things like collar buttons, and the new Gillette safety razor as well. Gifts for family, we have a camera, the fold-away Kodak is available, and a magic lantern so you can have a picture show in your home. We have food products for you like oysters and oranges. So please, I've got my order book ready. Why don't you come shopping?
Good evening and Merry Christmas, everybody, and welcome to the Cybert House, which is part of Doon Heritage Village. Well, what we're going to talk about tonight in the house are 1914 Canadian Christmas traditions, but traditions that were influenced by English Christmas traditions. Because it's not that much of a stretch to think that, okay, folks moving from England would have brought with them some of their own Christmas traditions, and these would have blended with ones that were already here. So, for those of you who don't know much about English Christmas traditions, let me summarize them for you. Basically, Christmas festivities in a house like this would involve 4 things: eating, drinking, kissing, and burning things. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I need you to use your imaginations for a moment, because I need you to think, okay, as you can see, we're decorated. It's actually Christmas Eve. And that's actually one of the English Christmas traditions. So unlike the malls and the stores nowadays where you start seeing Christmas in October, not in a house like this. You would decorate on Christmas Eve, and then you would celebrate the 12 days of Christmas. Yes, just like that Christmas ditty. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. Yeah, you know the one that never seems to end. Well, what did they do during the 12 days of Christmas? Well, they had a feeding frenzy, basically, and we even have suggestions on what to serve for Christmas meals at the time, and this actually comes from the Galt Cookbook, which was published locally in 1906, and they suggest that we actually start with oyster soup, and this is then followed up with roast turkey. And turkey was actually really popular meat for Christmas dinner, but so too were goose, duck, and chicken, and particularly if you were in a British household, roast beef. And of course, this would come with Yorkshire pudding. And you could also serve, as they're suggesting here, mashed potatoes, onions in cream sauce, rice croquettes, and a whole host of root vegetables. But one look at this table means we're not in that part of the dinner anymore. We're right at the end, near the desserts. And some of them are actually not too bad for you. For example, we have dates, we have figs, we have mixed nuts, oranges, pineapples, which actually would have been quite a treat at the time. However, if you look at the rest of the dining room table, it's a dentist's nightmare. So we have, for example, we've got shortbread, we've got pies, scotch mints, candy canes, humbugs, hard candies, ribbon candies, fudge, rosebuds, and macaroons. Anything with sugar, it'll end up on this table, apparently. However, we also have 3 favorite Christmas traditional foods. And I use the term favorite advisedly with the first one, and that's Christmas cake. Now, quick straw poll at home. Hands up, those of you who actually like Christmas cake. All right. Now, hands up who think it should only be used as a doorstop. Thought so. Now, this is mince pie. And mince pie actually has a tradition that comes with it, and that tradition runs along these lines. That if you eat 1 slice of mince pie for each of the 12 days of Christmas, 2 things guaranteed to happen. 1, you'll have good luck for the next 12 months. And 2, you'll be thoroughly sick of mince pie. And our third, which is probably the most favorite, and this is the plum pudding. And plum pudding comes with all sorts of its own traditions. And one of them starts the Sunday before Advent. It's often referred to as Stir Up Sunday. And this is the time when you're actually putting the plum pudding together. So there's a tradition that has each member of the household stirring the ingredients of the plum pudding. But you're supposed to stir from east to west because this is the direction that the wise men traveled in. And once you're stirring, each member of the family gets to make a wish. And then once it's thoroughly mixed up, you put it in a mold and you actually steam it. And that's basically the cooking process. But then you leave it for weeks and the flavors infuse the pudding. And then the fun begins on Christmas evening, because this is where the burning and booze enters the picture. So you grab your brandy just before you're going to bring in the pudding, and you pour it all over the plum pudding, light a match, and it goes on fire. And you bring in the plum pudding and this beautiful big blue flame emanating from the pudding, and you put it down on the table with pride of place. Now, there are even more traditions associated with it because hidden inside the plum pudding are treats. Fortune-telling treats, no less. So, for example, if you happen to find a coin in your slice, it meant that money was not going to be a problem in the next year. Now, if you happen to find a ring in there, it meant you were either going to find love or you're going to get married. Not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I'll leave that to you to judge. And if you found a thimble, it meant you were going to be an old maid. But just for that 1 year. Then you would find love, I'm sure, the following year after that. So that's the Christmas eating part, but they would still actually be around the Christmas table because they'd often play games. And there's one in particular that we now find a little odd, but it's called Snapdragon. And what's involved is you would take a tray, a fairly shallow tray, and you'd sprinkle currants or raisins on it, and then you reach for the booze again, glug, 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 and then you'd light them on fire. And then the aim of the game is to reach in, grab said flaming currants or raisins, chuck them in your mouth, close your mouth, hopefully extinguishing the flames. Because nothing says Merry Christmas quite like first-degree burns. Well, if you were successful in this venture, you'd get a prize. And if you were unsuccessful, you'd have to pay what they would call a forfeit. And the strange thing is the forfeit and the prize often took the same form, kissing. And they would take any opportunity, it would seem, to take up the kissing. And the kissing and the burning things would actually take place in other parts of the house as well, particularly the back parlor, because that's where the Christmas tree was, and it was lit by little candles, and it would be only lit for about 4 or 5 minutes at a time. And there would also be kissing in the back, because that's often where you would find mistletoe. Now, I'm sure most of you know the tradition that, okay, 2 people meet under mistletoe, you're supposed to lock lips. Again, any opportunity, we'll gladly take it up. Now, part of the tradition you may not know is mistletoe actually comes with little white berries. And after each kiss, what you're supposed to do is pluck one of the berries off. And once all the berries are gone, the mistletoe's power would disappear. Now, I use the term power because that actually goes way, way back to the medieval times when mistletoe was thought to be a magical plant. And it was said that if 2 enemies actually met underneath the mistletoe, their hatred for each other would suddenly disappear. Well, time for one more English Christmas tradition, and that's the singing of "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." So why don't you join in with me at home on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin, good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. Merry Christmas, everyone. Good evening, folks, and Merry Christmas again. Now, one of the family Christmas traditions in 1914 involved story reading. And how that would usually work is that a family would gather in the front parlor, like where we are right now in the Cybert house, and they would read stories to each other. And I happen to have one here just for you. And it's by O. Henry, and the name is The Gift of the Magi. And this story was incredibly popular in 1914, so I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and a word to the wise, keep your handkerchief handy. $1.87. That was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and cry. So Della did. Which prompts the observation that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from sobs to sniffles, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It didn't exactly beg her description, but it certainly had that word about it. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. And there was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with a powder rag. $20 a week doesn't go far, and expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always were. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the mirror. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, and rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. The other was Della's hair. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knees. And then she did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a moment and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with a brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door, down the stairs, and along the streets. And where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. Della collected herself for a moment and walked in. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Well, take your hat off and let's have a look at it. And down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass of hair with a practised hand. Oh, give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hash metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. And she found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with her 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might check the time in any company. Since as grand as the watch was, he used an old leather strap in place of a chain. When Della reached home, she got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long, carefully, and critically. Oh, if Jim doesn't kill me, he'll say that I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. Oh, but what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, ready to cook the chops. Then she heard his step on the stairs on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. Della had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in. Oh, he looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, and his eyes were fixed on Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her with that peculiar expression. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off, and I sold it because I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. I just had to do it. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a nice gift I got for you. Jim looked around the room curiously. You say your hair is gone? You needn't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you. It's Christmas Eve, Jim. Be good to me, for it went for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim? Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake, and he drew Della into his arms. Jim then drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it on the table. Don't mistake me, Dell, he said. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that present, you may see why you had me going at first. White fingers nimbly tore at the string and paper. Then a thrilled scream of joy followed, alas, by hysterical tears, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs that Della had worshipped for so long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful, vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew that, but her heart yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. She hugged them, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present, and she held it out to him eagerly on an open palm. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town. Oh, give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em for a while. They're too nice to use just at present. You see, I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. Now, suppose you put the chops on." The magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents, and being wise, their gifts were, no doubt, wise ones. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish people in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their home. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Merry Christmas, everybody.